In January 2026, in the Persian Gulf, the pieces were already set on the chessboard. The moves were being made. If you listen to the Pentagon's press briefings, they will tell you that the United States has already achieved strategic dominance. They point to the northern Arabian Sea, where the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, sits. The carrier, equipped with the F-35C Lightning II, a fifth-generation stealth fighter, is the centerpiece. The narrative is clear. With the F-35C, the airspace is locked down, a ghost in the sky, completely under control. But the strategy doesn't just rely on the skies. The Pentagon doesn't stop there. They show you Operation Agile Spartan, where the U.S. Air Force has deployed the 494th Fighter Squadron. There, the F-15E Strike Eagles, heavy hitters capable of carrying 23,000 pounds of ordnance each, take their place. On paper, everything seems balanced. You have the invisible air threat, and then you have the brute force on the ground, a perfect deterrent. The F-35C works in the shadows, while the F-15E delivers the massive firepower needed on the ground. However, here at Navy Decoded, we don't take press releases at face value. We look at the numbers. And when you calculate the logistics behind this perfect deterrent, it starts to fall apart. There's a fatal flaw in the formation, an oversight in sustainment that no one is talking about. Let's take a closer look at the F-15E. Yes, it's a king of the sky, but it's also bound to the earth. It requires a fixed runway, a solid infrastructure in places like Qatar or the UAE. In 2026, against an adversary like Iran, a fixed runway is not an asset, it's a target. Iran's ballistic missile doctrine is entirely built around runway denial. If conflict turns kinetic, those air bases are eliminated in the first 10 minutes. Once the runway is gone, the F-15E becomes little more than a relic, a static display in a museum. Now, let's shift focus to the USS Abraham Lincoln itself. While it is an excellent tool for the initial strike, its reliance on stealth, embodied by the F-35C, presents another set of challenges. The F-35C must carry its weapons internally, a design necessity dictated by physics to maintain its radar cross-section as small as possible. This stealth capability comes at a significant cost: limited internal weapon bays. While the F-35 can precisely eliminate high-value targets like radar sites or command bunkers, it doesn't have the capacity to deliver sustained firepower. A single strike, yes, but what happens on day 7, day 30? What happens when the conflict shifts from precision strikes to a grinding war of attrition? The Lincoln, despite its stealth, starts to lose its edge. The F-35 can only carry so much. The airspace may be cleared for the first few days, but eventually the logistics fall short. The Lincoln runs out of the ammunition it needs to maintain a sustained presence. The strike power begins to diminish. If the F-35 can't carry the necessary volume of fire, the Lincoln becomes a limited asset, valuable for the opening move, but not for the long haul. Now, contrast this with the ground reality. The F-15E, while powerful, is dependent on fixed infrastructure. It can unleash destruction, but its reach is limited to the runway it's based on. If those runways are gone, so too are its capabilities. We are left with a very real question. How does the U.S. maintain an effective military presence when the strategic infrastructure is under constant threat of destruction? The math of this perfect deterrent starts to collapse. What was thought to be a balanced force, a stealthy air force in the skies, and the brute force of the F-15E on the ground, becomes a fragile equation. The runways are no longer safe, and the Lincoln can't carry the volume of fire needed. So what's the solution? Enter the USS George HW Bush. Now, let's talk about the USS George HW Bush, the wild card in this strategic equation. Unlike the Abraham Lincoln, The George H.W. Bush is the answer to the logistical gap. It is the necessary reinforcement, but it's not a flawless solution. The Pentagon hasn't confirmed it's joining the Lincoln. They call it routine training. But the numbers tell a different story. The Bush is already steaming east from Norfolk, headed toward the Persian Gulf. It is, without a doubt, the missing piece in this strategy. But the George H.W. Bush brings more than just firepower. It carries with it a sense of legacy, a spirit that is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. This ship is named after the only U.S. president to be shot down in combat and survive. The spirit of George H.W. Bush, a man who endured being stranded in the Pacific Ocean after being shot down in 1944, refuses to surrender to the sea. That story is forever embedded in the very steel of this carrier. It embodies resilience, strength, and a relentless will to fight. Yet despite its formidable spirit, the Bush is not a perfect vessel. It's a mutant, an anomaly in the fleet. The 10th and final ship of the Nimitz class, it is in many ways not a true Nimitz-class carrier at all. The Bush occupies a transitional space, somewhere between the old world of proven Nimitz-class engineering and the new experimental world of the Gerald R. Ford-class carriers. And like all transitional designs, the Bush carries with it flaws. One of the most glaring issues is the ship's inherent list. The Bush has a tendency to roll to starboard due to a significant shift in the hull's design. Specifically, the radical displacement of its bulbous bow and the altered position of the island. The ship's stability is compromised, forcing the crew to deal with a constant challenge. But the Navy didn't redesign the hull or scrap the ship. Instead, they opted for a brute force solution to correct the issue. To counterbalance the George H.W. Bush's natural tendency to list, the Navy did something radical. They didn't simply add more ballast in a conventional way, like pumping water into tanks or making adjustments to the hull structure. That would have been too expensive, too time-consuming. Instead, they performed what can only be described as corrective surgery deep within the ship's keel. Hundreds of tons of solid ballast, massive blocks of pig iron and lead, were welded directly into the ship's port side. Think about the physics of this. To make the Bush effective, they had to intentionally make it heavier. These enormous chunks of metal, dead weight in essence, were added to the hull to keep it from tipping over. It's as if you put a linebacker in ankle weights to keep them from losing their balance. The ship's design was not adjusted to fix the issue. Instead, the solution was to weigh it down, to anchor it to one side. This was a heavy price to pay for the sake of stability. But this is the reality of a mutant ship, a vessel that was designed to fight but was not built for perfection. It's a compromise between maintaining the functionality of the ship and addressing its inherent design flaws. And in the context of war, when perfection is an unattainable goal, this ship's weight, quite literally, becomes its strength. This brings us to a larger question. Why send a ship that lists to the right? Why send a vessel that carries around hundreds of tons of dead weight through some of the most dangerous and strategically crucial waters in the world? The answer is simple. War is not about perfection. It's not about sending in the sleek, perfect machine. When stealth wears off, when runways are gone, what you need is not elegance or beauty. You need sheer force. The USS Abraham Lincoln might pick the lock with its stealth and precision, but the George H.W. Bush, with all its imperfections, will be there to kick the door down. To understand why the George H.W. Bush is the linchpin of this operation, we need to step back and examine the real-world logistics of sustained combat. The Lincoln and its F-35C are fantastic for initial strikes. Stealthy, precise, and capable of neutralizing key targets quickly. But in a prolonged conflict, these assets are limited by their own design and resources. When the air bases are reduced to rubble and stealth technology fades, the Lincoln can no longer be the primary hammer in the fight. This is where the George HW Bush becomes indispensable. It brings something the Lincoln can't provide: sustained firepower. The Bush isn't reliant on stealth. It doesn't need to hide in the shadows. Instead, it uses brute force. The Bush brings Carrier Air Wing 7, CVW-7, a heavy wing complement including the FA-18EF Super Hornet Block 3, an aircraft that may not have the high-tech stealth of the F-35, but is a workhorse in terms of delivering volume firepower. These Super Hornets don't operate in stealth mode. They don't have the luxury of hiding from radar or carefully selecting their targets. They are made to saturate the enemy's defenses. Look at their payload. Not just 2 bombs tucked inside, but 10 external bombs strapped to every available hardpoint. These planes are designed for massive fire support, not surgical strikes. They are the opposite of the F-35, less precise, but much more effective when the volume of fire is what matters most. This is the gap that the Lincoln cannot fill: the lack of sustainable mass. While the Lincoln has the precision of the F-35C, it lacks the ability to deliver continuous heavy strikes. The Bush, with its Super Hornets, compensates for that shortcoming. These planes are capable of providing the sheer volume of fire that will be needed in an extended conflict, one where it's not about finesse, but about overwhelming force. And crucially, the George H.W. Bush brings with it an indestructible airfield. Unlike the F-15Es, which depend on fixed bases that are vulnerable to missile attacks, the Bush is a mobile, self-sustaining platform that can move through hostile waters without relying on any land-based infrastructure. It operates with 2 Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors, providing nearly limitless power for its operations. It can stay at sea for extended periods, resupplied by its own fleet of supply ships, and it moves faster than many might expect, cruising at over 30 knots. This is the strategic redundancy the U.S. military needs. If the air bases burn, if the Lincoln runs out of stealth munitions, the Bush keeps pounding away. It is the sea hammer, the constant in a war that increasingly becomes about attrition. The Bush doesn't need a runway to survive. It is a runway. It doesn't need to depend on the land-based infrastructure that is so vulnerable in a conflict with Iran. It brings its own city, its own force projection, its own ability to keep fighting, no matter what happens to the rest of the battlefield. As impressive as the George H.W. Bush is, it doesn't come without its own set of unique engineering challenges. This ship, while powerful, is also a product of its time, a transitional platform between the tried and tested Nimitz-class carriers and the advanced Gerald R. Ford-class ships. The Bush was designed with many cutting-edge features, but it also carries the baggage of its predecessors. Take, for example, the ship's distinctive bulbous bow. It's a feature that sets the Bush apart from the other carriers in the fleet. The bulbous bow is designed to reduce drag, which increases fuel efficiency and buoyancy. It's a clever engineering solution that aims to improve the ship's performance in the water. By generating a secondary wave that cancels out the primary bow wave, the Bush can move more efficiently through the water. This design allows the ship to conserve energy, helping its nuclear reactors last longer without expending excess fuel. However, this efficiency comes at a cost. The bulbous bow shifts the center of buoyancy, altering the ship's natural stability. The result is that the Bush tends to roll to starboard. In simpler terms, the ship becomes inherently unstable under certain conditions, particularly when fully loaded. This is where the added weight on the port side, the corrective ballast, becomes a critical component in stabilizing the ship. It's a necessary imperfection. This trade-off, better performance in the water at the cost of stability, highlights the Bush's role as a mutant ship. It wasn't designed to be the perfect solution. It was designed to be functional in a world where perfect solutions are impossible. The Bush is a testament to the reality of military engineering. It's not always about making the most elegant or flawless design. It's about making a design that works in the real world, where compromises are necessary to ensure effectiveness. Alongside this, the ship's superstructure has undergone significant changes from the traditional Nimitz-class carriers. On older Nimitz-class ships, the island, where the bridge and command systems are housed, was a large, imposing structure filled with radar arrays and antennas. This design was highly detectable, emitting radar signatures that could easily be tracked. The Bush re-engineered this design with stealth in mind. The island has been moved farther aft, and the radar arrays have been minimized. What once was a glaring beacon on the horizon is now a more subtle, low-profile design. The composite materials used absorb radar waves rather than reflect them, reducing the ship's radar signature. This stealthier design helps the Bush minimize its radar footprint, forcing enemy sensors to get much closer in order to detect it. It's not invisible. Nothing that large can be, but it is harder to spot from a distance. This subtle shift in the design reflects a larger shift in naval warfare, a recognition that in modern combat, invisibility may be impossible, but reduced detectability is still a massive advantage. While the George HW Bush has been engineered with stealth in mind, it is not impervious to every threat. In the Persian Gulf, the real danger may not come from surface ships or aircraft, but from beneath the waves. The Iranian Kilo-class submarines, quiet and deadly, are designed to hunt ships like the Bush. These diesel-electric submarines, which are incredibly silent when submerged, can operate without the telltale noise that typically accompanies nuclear-powered ships like the Bush. Submarines are predators in the water, and a carrier, with its massive size and the noise generated by its propulsion system, is essentially a mobile target. The cavitation from the ship's propellers, when water pressure drops, causing the water to vaporize and form bubbles, creates a loud, easily detectable sound. These bubbles collapse as they move, generating shock waves that can be heard from miles away. The noise made by the Bush in the water can be comparable to that of a freight train, making it a prime target for submarines lurking beneath. However, the Bush is not without its countermeasures. Its propulsion system, with 4 bronze propellers, has been specially designed to mitigate cavitation. The blades have been re-engineered to cut through the water more smoothly, reducing the onset of cavitation. This improvement delays the point at which the propellers create the telltale noise that would normally give away the ship's position. It's not a perfect solution, and the Bush will still be detectable. But by reducing the noise generated by cavitation, the Bush makes it harder for Iranian submarines to detect it from a distance. In effect, it forces the enemy to get closer, to risk detection as they close the gap. But when they do get closer, they enter a zone where the Bush's escort ships, designed for anti-submarine warfare, can take over. The escorts are equipped with sophisticated sonar systems and anti-submarine missiles, ready to engage any threats before they can reach the carrier. This design strategy shows how the Bush isn't just about raw power or stealth. It's about understanding the complex battlefield and using engineering to solve real-world challenges. The ship is not invincible, but it has been crafted to minimize its vulnerabilities, forcing enemies to fight on the Bush's terms.